Good evening, everyone. This is another video of Torah 14 is coming at you. This week is Parshat Va'eira. And first I'm going to start with a quote by the Talmud. It says, "Only a lesson that can be enjoyed will be learned well." And this means that you have to enjoy learning Torah. You can't just read it and just go to the next thing. You have to know it, understand it, and the more time you know it, the more stuff you're going to find. The more times you dig in, the more stuff you're going to unravel. And that's a Jewish. That's an aid for the Jewish soul. And I'm going to start with something in Va'eira. It says the Egyptians humiliate the Jews. Why did the Egyptians suffer the plague of frogs? Because all of the makos had mida keneged mida. Like wild animals is because the Egyptians sent them out to go get wild animals, and they killed when the death of the cattle is because they killed their cattle. It has all mida keneged mida. It means like if you did something to somebody, it's going to come back to you. And it says, why did the Egyptians suffer the plague of frogs? It was because of the Egyptians told the Jews, "Go out to the field and bring us insects and crawling creatures so that we can play with them as we wish." Therefore, Hashem punished them by bringing frogs that were so abundant they heard croaking in the stomachs of the Egyptians. Like when the frogs were everywhere, and it says that when they ate, some of them got into the stomachs and they would croak in the stomachs. Why the Egyptians gain by the Jews to bring them crawling creatures? Crawling creatures are repellent and no one wants to touch them. The Egyptians wished to make the Jews feel like lowly creatures, similar to the ones they had to collect. It is natural for a person to identify with the work that he's doing. They hoped that by forcing the Jews to work with such creatures, they would stop feeling that they were a special chosen nation and would start feeling inferior. The Egyptians wanted the Jews to feel inferior so that they would feel that their task is to serve the Egyptians. They wished to subconsciously influence the Jews to believe these thoughts, so there would be no thoughts of rebellion. So they would rebel against the Egyptians because they're making them work very hard, because nobody wants to be a slave. And there's another one. It says, a noisy disgrace. Why did the Egyptians suffer the plague of frogs? It was because the Egyptians told the Jews to go out and fetch them. Okay. So it says, why did the Egyptians receive the punishment they did? The abundance of the frogs was repellent. They made awful noise and were crawling and jumping everywhere. Thus the Egyptians suffered from the same affliction that they wished to bring upon the Jews. They try to make the Jews feel inferior, so they themselves become inferior as a result to the disgusting frogs, so that the Jews would feel lowly because they have to go out and collect creatures that we could find anywhere today, and they would make them feel lonely because they're like lazy. Why our sages relate that the frogs could be heard from within their stomachs? The Egyptians commanded the Jews to collect crawling insects with our hands so that they could be eaten for their pleasure. They wished to derive enjoyment with their stomachs, but God decided that they would be punished with their stomachs. The noise that the frogs made caused great disgrace to the Egyptians. Not only did they suffer from having frogs in their stomachs, but everyone could clearly hear their disgrace. This was a fitting punishment for the disgrace that they caused on the Jews by making them bring crawling creatures to them. Thus, they themselves suffer the same fate as the Jews. I'm going to say one more lesson. It says, respecting others. The Midrash teaches us that the Jews suffered great disrespect at the hands of the Egyptian oppressors. This is the style of the wicked, who wish to dominate and rule over their fellow men without their consent. Sadly, such behavior is only found among friends and neighbors. There are people who think they're superior to others. They act as if they were Egyptian masters, and all others are their lowly servants. The basis of living with other people is to have respect for them. If they treat you respectfully, you should treat them back respectfully. And we must all love human beings, as the Torah commands us, and you shall love your friend as you shall love yourself. All feelings of superiority find their source in the evil inclination within us, since the Torah tells us that every person is equal to each and every other. That today is what I'm going to say for the Parsha. And in this Parsha, Va'eira, it actually says, in Va'eira, for what Vav and Aleph. Vav is 6 in Gematria and Aleph is 1 in Gematria. That equals 7. That's telling you right there that there's 7 plagues in this Parsha. Next Parsha is Bo. Bo is, what's a base? It's 2, and an Aleph is 1. That's for Gematria. That equals 3. 7. There's going to be 7 Makos in this Parsha, 3 Makos in the next Parsha. So it adds up to 10 for all the 10 Makos. In this Parsha, there's going to be the blood, the lice, the frogs, the lice, the wild animals, the death of the animals, the shchin, and the boils, and the hail. So I'm going to explain what all of the makos were. So, Dam is the plague where blood filled all the Egyptians' water sources. The only 2 ways they could get water is either if they bought from the Jews water, or they had to dig up very, very, very deeply to get water for themselves. That's showing you right there that they have to work very hard for making the Jews work very hard. And so that the plague was not life-threatening because the Egyptians could buy water from the Jews or find their own water by digging new wells very deeply in the ground. So Moshe told Aaron put the stick into the Nile, and the whole thing became Nile. And also said the servants of Pharaoh, they could do that too. They did like a fake thing because they could do black magic, and they made blood. So that was the blood that they made, and that wasn't real blood. Hashem's the only blood. So Pharaoh didn't really believe that Hashem was overpowered than them. They believed in idols, but they didn't think the Jews' God was stronger than them and their gods. So they, of course, could make their own. So the second one, it's Svaradea, which is frogs. In addition to the unbearable annoyance of the round-the-clock croaking, the frogs actually crept into the innards of the Egyptians and threatened their lives. So the story about the frogs is that one frog jumped out of the Nile and started croaking around, but it was huge. It was like a mama frog. And the Egyptians suddenly noticed it's like a big frog. So they start taking sticks and they start hitting it because it's annoying. It's croaking and it's moving everywhere. And every time they hit it, a new frog jumped out. So it was the main source or the main supply of all the frogs, where all the frogs came from. And it not gave birth to frogs, it came out of its mouth. So, but every time it hurt her, it gave off more frogs. And it said that, as I said before, it was everywhere. When they ate like something to eat, the frog was inside their food, and when they ate their food, it got into their stomach and they had to croak so they couldn't get rid of the sound of the croaking. The third makkah is lice, kinim. Although Pharaoh's also the frogs, the Egyptian black magic, they could just summon a frog and say it's not a big deal because it's life threatening, but they could copy it too. And kinim, lice, although Pharaoh's magicians finally conceded that the plague could only have been brought by Hashem, Pharaoh would not budge because the plague was uncomfortable but not dangerous. The kinim, Aaron took the staff and he swung it, and all the dirt that went out, it turned into, from the west wind, it turned into lice, and they came and they started going all over the Egyptians, scratching them, and they couldn't deal with the scratching because it was very irritating, but it wasn't life-threatening. It didn't really hurt them that much. But Hashem actually made Pharaoh's heart harden, so it was like stone, it said, and he wouldn't budge, as I said before. The fourth one is wild beasts. Anyone would have feared for his life when surrounded by beasts of the wild. Pharaoh, for the first time, promised to capitulate to all of Moshe's demands. Wild beasts they're scary. They're one of the scariest things on earth. It said before that the wild beasts, Hashem made it that their only action or their only intention now was to kill humans. But they only attacked on the border of Egypt. They didn't attack on Goshen, so it only attacked the Egyptians. but their intention was only to kill humans. So they just, and it also said that if something was coming, like a polar bear or something, it was surrounded around it by like ice, an ice like circle, but they could still attack. And it also said that Egyptians couldn't even do anything about it because even if they were behind locked doors, they still had dirt floors. So the snakes and everything that lived underground could just come right up and attack them. So it was a very scary Makkah for the Egyptians. The fifth Makkah is the epidemic, when the when the Egyptians' animals died. Only animals died, not people. Excuse me. The Egyptians that wanted to stay inside, they didn't. The animals that stayed inside, that the Egyptians like trusted in Hashem, their animals didn't get hurt, but only the Egyptians are like, who's this God to like rule over if we could take out our cattle or a sheep or anything out or not. So he just said, let's just go outside. Nothing's gonna happen because they didn't really believe, and because their Egyptians could do everything else. But of course, Hashem kills all of the animals, and they believe. 6 is boils, and Shchen. Again, the plague caused extreme discomfort, but killed no one. Furthermore, as implied by the Torah, which does not mention Paro, it may be that it inflicted only his people, but not him. So, in this, it says that the Shchen was in every part of the body, so you can't really do anything, because it could be on your backside and you couldn't sit, it could be on your feet and you couldn't walk, you couldn't touch anything, because boils were all over you, and it really hurts, really painful. If you get a boil now, and you start touching it, or you have to touch anything with your boil, it's going to hurt very, very bad. So this was painful, but it didn't kill anybody. It wasn't life-threatening. The 7th and last one I'm going to talk about today is hail, Barad. The loud thunder and flames from heaven terrified everyone, making them fear they would suffer the same total destruction as Sodom had in Avram's time. So Sodom, before it was attacked, the angels like started doing thunder and everything. Hashem overturned the city, and you could find it underground. But the Egyptians feared the same, that they would get the same fate. They would die the same way. And so they were scared for their lives, and they didn't want anything to happen to them because they were scared. And it said that it was the two components that are supposed to be against each other worked with each other. Ice and fire are enemies, but they work with each other just this time. And it's also said that the bar that was falling, there's still some stuck between heaven and the earth, because Hashem could have kept on going and going, but he stopped, of course, after amount of days. Thank you for listening to the shir today. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and smash the like button. Have a good evening, and have a great night.